Hello and welcome to Pots and Trowels with me, Martin Fish, joined as usual by Sean and Jill.
Hi.
Now this week I'm going to be out meeting a specialist grower, Jonathan Sheppard, who grows cosmos and is going to be exhibiting at the RHS Chelsea Flower Show for the very first time.
And we're going to be answering some listeners' questions. There's one about fig pruning, there's one about the asparagus beetle, and there's also a hydrangea question coming up.
And we've got some jobs for you to be getting on with in the garden. But first of all, let's find out where Martin is.
Jonathan, we're standing looking into a polytunnel that is quite a big polytunnel full of cosmos, which we'd normally see in full flower in sort of July onwards. And here we are, beginning of May, and they're destined, some of them, for the Chelsea Flower Show, which we'll pick up on in a minute. But first of all, tell me, how did you get into cosmos and having the national collection?
Well, I've always liked growing cosmos. I always say to people, I think they're one of the easiest flowers to germinate, to get growing. And it was one of those chance visits to Hampton Court where I bumped into the people at Plant Heritage and got involved with them, really. So the first national collection was hollyhocks, which is another passion. Once I'd done that, having a national collection is all about, for me, it's learning about how to label plants properly, which I'd never done previously. I'd just stick a plant in and wouldn't care what it was called. And if it was a nice pink one, that was good enough for me. And then it was setting up the national collection. And then, because I guess I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment, I took it on a step further, and a couple of years ago took my cosmos to Hampton Court and exhibited them.
I remember seeing them. So, but how long ago is it that you started growing cosmos? Because did it start as a hobby and then just grew out of control?
Yeah. I think my whole sort of gardening has started. It's still a hobby which has grown out of control to the extent that my wife moans at me that we've got these two 72-foot polytunnels all of a sudden full of flowers. But there's worse things that you could be doing as a hobby, I suppose.
I suppose there is, yes. And I remember your first stand at Hampton Court 2 years ago. So you do it sort of in the Plant Heritage area. You're the national collection holder, or a collection holder, and it's more educational, isn't it? You're trying to educate people on the importance of having collections and growing them.
Yeah, I think I mean that's the part that I enjoy. I think the most about the growing is it's meeting people and to talk about your plants, and it's not just about specifically educating them about how you grow cosmos and when to sow them and the effects of grand words like photoperiodism and things like that. For me, it's also, I like to talk about how I try my best but don't claim to be perfect. It's about trying to grow a bit more sustainably than maybe I would have 10 years ago. So people will come up to me and say, my cosmos have got green fly, what do I spray on them? And I say, well, I don't spray anything. I get, if you're squeamish, put a rubber glove on, or if you're not, just use your hands and rub them off. That's how I deal with it. I don't spray pesticides on them. I don't use peat. So hopefully people will see at the flower show that you can grow decent blooms without peat. I use solely stored rainwater, which is ironic given the amount of rain we've had over the last few months. But that will be an issue come in the middle of summer when all of a sudden some areas will still be in water deficit. So it's those kind of things that you can chat to people about, how you grow them and why you grow them and what are the new cultivars that they may want to try. And people will come up and say, that's a massive cosmos, I've never seen that. And it's like, well, you'll never have seen it in a garden centre because they won't stock it, but you could buy a packet of seeds and have a go yourself.
Well, that brings me to a point, because when people buy plants of cosmos, and they'll be in garden centres in any time now as young seedlings in packs, they tend to be the dwarf compact ones. But you have got a range. Some of yours will get 5-6 feet tall. So
I mean, they're actually. I mean, what's interesting to me is obviously the only way you can really exhibit them is in pots, and actually that keeps them smaller than they would be in the ground. So some of them I would never really advise planting in a pot. A Cosmos Dazzler, if it's in too fertile a soil, can grow as big as me. You'll get too much green foliage if you give it too much nitrogen feed, but it'll be a whopper. Whereas in the garden centre, what they'll stock, and we only went at the weekend and saw the trolleys had just come in, and there were 9 racks of them, because they'll sell the dwarf ones because they're easier to look after.
Very
and I
true.
appreciate that.
Yes. So to have the national collection, how many different types of cosmos do you have to have? Is there a minimum you've got to have to qualify?
I think there is. I can, and it changes all the time. So, for example, you'll have a national collection of sweet peas, and I know Roger Parsons won't particularly grow every sweet pea that's ever existed. That'd be ridiculous because it's over 7,000. I think, and again, don't tell my wife, because then it'll.
She might be listening to this
podcast.
podcast.
It might belay how many kind of seeds I buy, because obviously I have to source them initially from somewhere. I reckon I'll have probably round about 70 odd different cultivars, and new ones are coming out all the time.
Yeah. And are you able to save any seed yourself, or do they just cross-pollinate?
Yes, well, there's bits of both. So part of the role, and it's brought it home to me only this week. So there's one plant one cultivar that I really like called Pink Mosaic. I showed it at Hampton Court last year. I really like it. It sounds like the company that brought it to market no longer want to support that seed because it's not dwarf enough for their liking, which brings me back to the point that you just made. So then the onus, if I like it, and as a national collection, the onus will be on me of trying to isolate that seed and to keep it coming true and to keep that seed in existence, because no one else will.
No. So in order to do that, then presumably you've got to have it where it can't be visited by a bee that's already visited another one.
Absolutely, and that's the bit that kind of upsets me a bit, because I talk all about pollinators, and the bees have been in here, so these will all have been cross-pollinated in this polytunnel. But I've got these essentially mesh domes that look a bit ridiculous, that will go over a couple of plants, and so the objective then is for me to pollinate them myself, and then to see what the seed comes back the next year. And you never know, just as if you buy a packet of seeds, sometimes people get a little bit worried or a little bit irked that not every seed that you buy from, what I would say, a traditional reputable seed dealer always comes true to what you're expecting.
No, you hear stories where people plant it to be pink and it comes out white.
Exactly.
So exactly, yes. So as I said, we're in here, it's beginning of May, and these plants are being grown specifically for the Chelsea Flower Show, which is third week in May. So why on earth are you doing the Chelsea Flower Show rather than Hampton Court? Because Hampton Court is surely the natural time for these. So is it just the challenge?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. It's a bit, I always say I mean, what an honour. It's a bit an amateur grower. It's not trained. It's not my job. It's like being invited to the Olympics.
Yeah.
Hopefully I won't end up being a figure of ridicule, a bit of an Eddie Edwards, but at the same time he was loved by everyone, so that may be no bad thing.
I don't think you will be, and I think, when I first appeared, I stood here and said, wow, because to see this amount of colour at this time of the year on Cosmos is pretty spectacular, the amount of work you've gone in. What I want to do is find out a bit more how you've grown them, a few of your little secrets that we can share, and then, what you're going to be doing at Chelsea. So what we'll do is we're going to take a little break, and then we'll come back and have a wander down your polytunnel.
Fantastic. Look forward to it.
7,000 types of sweet peas.
There's an awful lot,
That's
isn't it?
amazing.
This is an awful lot to grow, yes.
Who would have thought that?
Well, some of those will be hundreds of years old, of course.
Yeah,
But
you've had a bit of a disaster with our sweet peas, haven't you? Just going off on a side.
That's a lot
line.
of
Yes,
labels
I
as
hope-
well, isn't it? Sorry, go on. What's happened to your
It
sweet
is
peas?
a lot of labels. Well, I hope King Seeds aren't listening, because the seeds are from them. Actually, I have got some spares. They germinated well, they grew really well. Planted them out a couple of weeks ago to go up the wigwam, expecting them to romp away. We've got a rogue rabbit in the garden, only a baby bunny. And while we were away at the Malvern Flower Show last week, it's nibbled them quite low. So unfortunately, I've got some spare plants. I need to net round them, and I need to get rid of the rabbit out the garden. Otherwise, it's going to be disastrous,
Has
darling.
he not just sort of pinch them out for you?
Yeah.
Will they grow even thicker?
But then he'll keep, or she will keep pinching them out, and we'll never get any. So
Yeah.
anyway, we don't want to talk about my losses.
No, well, I want to just talk about national collections, because obviously Jonathan holds the National Collection of Cosmos. Is he the only one with a National Collection of Cosmos? And could I set up a national collection of something if I was just a keen grower?
You have to have a certificate or something.
Yeah. A certificate, and then what do you have to do? Do you have to keep sending in reports to a body of national collection
committee?
holders, or
All these questions.
I know.
Come on, Martin,
curious.
tell us more. We need to know.
The national collections are sort of overseen by a national organisation called Plant Heritage. So they sort of manage it all. And I think if you wanted to have a national collection, what would you want to have as a national collection?
I don't know. I was thinking about that.
Okay, but you can't just have 3 of a plant.
Something small if you're going to have that many of them.
Yeah.
Yes. So you have got to have in your private garden collection, and they're not all private gardens. It can be, the RHS have several collections in each of their gardens. I'm sure the National Trust do. So there are national collections all over the UK on all ranges of plants, from bulbs to sweet peas to cosmos to trees to shrubs.
Is it fruit and veg as well?
I'm not sure whether it includes fruit and veg. Very probably.
Because I'd probably have raspberries. I think.
Okay. But you've got to have a good selection. So if you were growing, I'm looking out the window, I can see a pittosporum shrub. You'd probably have to have 20 or 30 varieties, species or cultivars at least, if not more, depending how many there are. So you've got to have a good collection of them. They've all got to be correctly named. You then have to get them to look at them, and you normally have to have 2 of each plant. I think that's how it works. Yeah. But they could be then potentially be lots of other people all over the UK with the same collection. So the idea is they might have some of the ones you haven't got. Right. Likewise, if some of yours die, you can go somewhere and get the stock. So it is very carefully sort of managed and curated.
So the idea is to prolong those species, so they're never going to die out.
Yeah, a lot of the sort of plants that are in national collections, for example, a friend of ours, Vicky Fox, has got one of the national collections of heucheras. It's so that they're always there, because some of them aren't generally in production commercially anymore, the old varieties, so it keeps them there for heritage.
Okay, well I was wondering if you can get a grant towards kind of looking after them, because I'm thinking of starting to collect giant redwoods.
Oh, really? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that'd be good. How many do you think you would get in your back garden, though, Sean?
We might struggle to get one in there, but
Yeah, well, there you go. You could.
But with your strawberry success, you could do strawberries, Sean.
I could do strawberries. I could do that. I am doing all right with the strawberries.
Yeah.
How are they? Are they looking all right?
Yeah.
Are you getting some fruit?
Yeah, lots. I've got fruit. I've got little fruit. In fact, followers of our Pots and Trowels Facebook page and Instagram will have seen I put a photo on the other day of a couple of tiny little fruits. However, my hanging basket, I'm a bit worried the squirrels have been approaching, because I found a couple of kind of severed flower. So I don't know whether they've been having it like a pick and mix. So I'll have to move where it's hanging. But I have a problem because sorry to get into the detail, but we have a very kind of like shady north-facing garden. So to get sun on the hanging basket, it can't really be hanging on the wall of the house. I have to put it kind of against the fence. So it's where the squirrels wander along and go, oh, look, I'll have a taste of that. So, yeah, fun and games.
Okay, well, we've got some other listeners' problems and questions. So I've got one from Alison Rogers about a hydrangea arborescens, the Annabelle, which is the gorgeous big white pom-pom hydrangea, isn't it? She said, I've never grown this type of hydrangea before, and she's beginning to wish she hadn't tried, which is a huge shame because they're gorgeous, Alison. But she says the leaves are curling and have holes in them. I suspect a leaf-eating critter. She's been told that she could remove the leaves, but then worries that she's going to have a leafless plant, which isn't going to look very good. Is there a spray to get rid of them? And then at the end she says, thank you as always for a great podcast.
Well done, Alison.
We've come to the hydrangea expert here. We are the YouTube #1 destination for hydrangea advice.
We are. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I know you're having problems with yours, Alison, but I think this is one of our favourite, isn't it? It's because as Sean says, it's got those big white pom-pom heads on it.
No, it's me that said that.
Was it you said that? Okay. It's got these big white pom-pom heads, July right the way through till autumn time. And the reason I like it is because it's one that's so simple to prune. You just literally cut this down to ground level in March. It sends up these strong new shoots that flower for you in the summer, whereas the ordinary ones or macrophylla type ones you have to prune slightly differently. So normally it's very successful. So I'm really sorry that yours isn't. It sounds like it's got off to a slow start. I must admit ours is a bit slow in the back garden and the leaves are slightly distorted and almost a bit yellowy, and I think that's because we had such a wet spring. It started into growth later. It's getting better, ours is, now that we've had a period of warmer, drier weather, and I've also given it a bit of a feed and a mulch, so a bit of compost around the base and a little bit of fertiliser on there, which has made a big difference, and it will grow. But I think the holes are potentially caused by slugs. I have noticed slugs and snails do quite like those tender young shoots on it because they are very soft and obviously tasty to them. So I think you probably need to pop out of an evening and just have a good look round it, lift a few leaves and see if there are any slugs. Do whatever you do to control them, whether it's the organic slug bait or your beer traps or however you want to catch them. But I think that's probably what's causing the problem. But please, Alison, don't give up on it because it is a beauty. You will be rewarded, I'm sure, this summer.
Yeah. Superb. I was wondering about those slug kind of deterrents and all these kind of ideas of putting eggshells around, and lots of them don't seem to work in our garden. But I know that beer traps do and some of these other things. So, yeah, we should try that in our garden as well because they do like, I think it's the hostas that they like a lot in our garden.
They love hostas. Anyway, Alison, let us know in 2 months' time how it's doing. Hopefully it'll be much better.
Yeah, let's find out. We have a question that's been put on one of our YouTube videos. We have a video about how to prune fig trees, and somebody has asked a question. They noted that the fig tree that you're pruning had a single, what this person would call a sucker growing from the roots or around the soil, around the base. And they have a brown turkey fig with numerous of these suckers growing from the same area. Would you advise the removal of these or leave them to grow? Thanks in advance. Unfortunately, we don't have a name for this person.
Right. Well, I think that would be one of the videos that we did in a friend's polytunnel, I suspect. And that was done a year or so ago, a bit earlier in the season than this. It was probably done February, March time when they were just starting. Or we did a catch-up one in the summer. But yes, I know what you mean. You've got your main plant and then it looks like suckers coming out at ground level. They aren't suckers in the sense that you would get on a rose bush or an apple because the figs aren't usually grafted. They're propagated by cuttings. So any growth that comes from even below ground level will be part of the plant. It isn't a rootstock. So you don't have to take them off. It's not that they're going to take over. If you get suckers on a rose bush, for example, or an apple or a plum from the rootstock, they'll be different to the apple variety on the top. So you can leave these. If you think they're adding to the general shape of the plant and making it bushier, then you don't have to take them off. But if you wanted to create a sort of a bare base, as it were, and have the branch network sort of above ground level, then you could cut them off. And you could still do that at this time of the year. It wouldn't do any harm at all. Just cut them back and then all the energy will go into the remaining branches higher up.
Fantastic. Well, that's brilliant. I shall make sure that they know to listen to the podcast and find out all that they need to know about that. By the way, just a quick plug, if you've got a question for the team, drop us an email, info@potsandtrowels.com, or as we have just demonstrated, you can leave us a comment on one of the videos and we will try our best to answer your questions. Have we got another question there, Jill?
We have, and it's a bizarre coincidence because the friend whose fig tree it was has just been asking me this morning. I go to a knit and natter group in our village, and we were chatting about things. And it's Anne. I'll name her. Anne has got some asparagus growing in her polytunnel, and she has a huge problem this year for the first time with Asparagus Beetle. So she said, what can she do? She doesn't really like to spray anything. She has just been picking them off by hand, sort of shaking them into a bucket of water, and then I'm afraid they come to a watery death.
Well, yeah, sometimes you've got to do these things, haven't you? They, I mean, the asparagus beetle can be a problem some years. Obviously, it is this year for Anne. It's sort of quite a longish beetle, a bit of a stripy back on it, and you'll find them on the asparagus fronds when they start to open up into that ferny foliage. That's when you'll spot them, and the adult will feed on the foliage, but they also lay their eggs, and the little grubs that hatch out completely feast on it. And if you get a bad infestation, it will completely strip all that foliage. It doesn't kill the asparagus, but if it happens year on year, what happens is it weakens the crowns and you'll get less asparagus in subsequent years. And if you don't control them, what will happen is those little grubs that are feeding, when they've had enough of your asparagus, they fall to the ground, they pupate in the soil at the base of the asparagus plant, they overwinter, and then next spring they emerge as the asparagus is growing as a beetle. So it completes the life cycle. So you do need to try and do something to control them if you can. I think picking them off by hand. I mean, it's not the most interesting of job, but it's very rewarding. And you want the beetles as well as there'll be some grubs feeding there, like little sort of browny, maggoty grubs on there feeding. So you need to get rid of as many as you can by hand. You can get a nematode that you spray on, which is basically a microscopic little worm that you spray on, and the nematodes seek them out and cause damage to them, or they kill them. Or you could, if you wanted to use an insecticide, use one of the organic ones, one of the plant-based ones. Then they're not persistent for a long period. It doesn't affect the harvest period, and they don't have as much effect on other wildlife around anyway, because they just basically kill what it hits. So if you've got nothing else on your asparagus and you use one of the organic sprays, it will just kill those, and then it will sort of end its job. So there are ways you can do it, and you need to be on it straight away.
Yeah.
So when you next go to Knit and Natter, you need to
get
a message
this
to
podcast will be out before the next Knit and
There
Natter,
you
so
go.
I'll tell her to listen to the podcast.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Well, I think it's time now to get back to Jonathan and find out what's going on inside that polytunnel.
Tell me then, Jonathan, to get these plants in this condition now, which are big full plants, loads of flower, loads of buds on them, they look like they would do, as I said earlier, naturally as they'd be in July in your garden. How early did you have to start, and how difficult is it to get the time in to get them for the Chelsea Flower Show?
Timing is it's appalling. It's what I'm surprised I'm not bald and pulled my hair out, because you learn that different cultivars flower at different speeds. So for example, I know I've got a pot of Cosmos Purity that was sowed probably the second week in January that's just starting to flower. I actually sowed probably in total, to try and get some flowers for Chelsea, probably about 4,000 Cosmos, which I guess gives you a little idea of the scope of some of the works that's involved.
So you're growing 4,000 seedlings?
I've sowed, probably 4.
Right.
So I chose 30 cultivars that I thought would come into flower. Now, if you remember, at the start of the year, the weather was appalling and the sun didn't seem to come out for about 2 months. So initially I was panicking, thinking I'm never going to have anything ready. So I initially chose, looking back at what I did for Hampton Court, and I saw that actually some were earlier flowerers and were flowering at the time of the Chelsea Flower Show. So I chose some that I thought would flower earlier, along with some of the more traditional ones. So, for example, I sowed lots of apricotta. Now, my apricotta I sowed, I guess, like 30 plants once a week for 8 weeks, and I did that for each cultivar, and then added some. Lots of those have already flowered, and I'm thinking, okay, I can trim some, but they might not look at the peak, and judges will think, well, he's trimmed that a bit, it could be better. But that's the kind of effort that you put in. There's lots of sowing, because you realise that it's going to have to look its peak on a specific day, and then ideally for the rest of the week for the public.
Exactly.
And different plants react differently. So there's a pink popsox that's flowering beautifully now. That's one of the first weeks that were sowed.
And presumably these are being sown, if you're doing them in January, in some heat, in a propagator somewhere?
In my living room is the reality. I had racks of seed trays. Again, this comes back to not being a professional grower, that I had seed trays in our living room, because I'm not paying to heat glass houses or polytunnels, so the seed trays don't take up that much room, and then you're hoping that by the time the plants are ready to be potted on into smaller individual pots, that it's not minus 10 degrees in a polytunnel.
Okay.
But then you take other steps. So you can see inside this polytunnel I've got some extra, almost I call it double wrapping, whereby I've got some extra of the mini greenhouses that were pulled over when I thought it was getting cold, just to protect those. And then, some would be sacrificed if the frost got in. But there's only so much you can do.
Exactly, yeah. And I suppose the other thing is you don't want them to be too warm, because they're just going to get drawn and leggy, aren't they? You've got to grow them sort of fairly hard, but enough so they don't get damaged. So from seedling stage, small pots, presumably?
Yeah, so I use 7 centimetre pots. Quite often I'll put 2 seedlings in each, because I was brought up from Derbyshire initially, so close enough to Yorkshire, I guess, and I don't want to use more compost than I have
not
to.
At all. No, exactly.
So I'll put 2 in a 7 centimetre pot, and then when they're starting to develop a couple of sets of true leaves, do a bit of pinching out. People often ask me about that. I'm not religious about pinching out, because some of the dwarf cultivars, it's almost like what's the point? They'll form a bushy shape anyway.
And for those that don't know, pinching out encourages side shoots.
Yeah,
presumably.
exactly. So it makes for a more bushier plant. But I always say that, look, if you're doing that even for a tall cosmos, it's still going to end up wanting to be tall. It'll just be a bit more bushier. So, as we're looking out over the polytunnel now, you can see different shapes cosmos, because that's naturally what they do. Not all cosmos look the same.
Exactly. And then obviously the next stage, which we are looking at now, is those 7 centimetre pots are then potted. Multiple pots go into these wonderful terracotta pots that you're going to exhibit them in.
Yeah, sometimes there's a second stage where I'll use a 1.5 litre pot, and each individual plant will go into that, just so I can grow them on. And for me, it's all about watering. So one of the big tasks as well is that I water all of them by hand, which on days like today, even though it's just sort of the start of May, it's roasting in this polytunnel. It's 34 degrees, and ridiculously I'm still wearing a hoodie, but there we are. So, and then they go into the terracotta pots, because I want to be able to say to a punter at a flower show, these are growing in this pot. This is what you could do. This is what it will look like with its roots at the bottom.
Yes, it's not like buying them in flower and then plunging them into these big pots. No. They've been grown in it. And how would you as we came in, did you say it's 30-something degrees in here at the moment? That's centigrade, and we'll convert that to Fahrenheit for our listeners across there, the other side of that big sea. But last week, it was really cold, wasn't it? We were getting down into 4s and 5s. So do they cope with those fluctuations of temperature?
Seemingly so. I mean, it makes that this is, again, when you ask sort of what's involved, I get worried. I will be out here at midnight with a torch. It's quite lucky, I think, that the neighbours probably can't see, because they either think there's aliens around or somebody's coming to rob the place, because you're out checking the temperature and checking, how your plants are doing. But there's, it's seemingly that they don't want to be frosted, and at the same time, I think this as a temperature now is probably their limit, even though they're native of Mexico. You not want it to get too hot, just otherwise that with the plants that are in the terracotta, they'll just dry out really quickly, and you're just constantly on watering watch.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we're recording this ahead of it going out on the podcast. These are going to go down to Chelsea. I don't know what day you'll be going down. A couple of days before judging.
It's literally 2 weeks today.
From
the van
now.
Will be packed.
Okay. And we've got hundreds and hundreds of pots. How many are going to go down to Chelsea? Is it an articulated lorry?
I think it'll be. This is what I it makes me laugh, because it'll be about 12 pots, won't it? And so I think terracotta pots wise, there's some different sizes. There's some that are called small Harrogate, some are big Harrogate pots, and then there's long toms. I've got to have got maybe 250 planted up to take maybe 12, and I'll squeeze it. If they look good, I'll squeeze in as many as possible. Yeah. But yeah, it'll be about 12 different cultivars, I would think. So
you will have to select at the time what is best, or going to look right on judging day on the Monday. That's the key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, on that Thursday, me and my wife will have big old arguments, because she'll be saying, I think that looks best, and I'll be telling her, don't be ridiculous. I know exactly what will happen, and she'll be right, but again, I definitely hope she isn't listening to the podcast and she hears that bit. I'm
going to send her a direct link.
It's like now I'm looking at some that I think look amazing, but I'm saying, but that's never going to be amazing in 2 weeks, even though in a garden it would be amazing.
Yeah, can you? I mean, there's one here, a lovely. It's just a naturally dwarf one by the look at, with big white flowers, and it's probably only 40 centimetres tall, but full of flower. So, in 2 weeks' time, is that going to have gone too far, or can you deadhead it to prolong the flowering so that
I
the
will.
buds?
I mean, this is what I will. So I know that there's some apricotta that I've taken all the apricottas off, for example, and already the new buds have shot up and are covering, I guess, where I've cut them. It's what I have to have in my mind is a judge going to think, okay, that's been cut off too much, even though that's naturally what you do with cosmos. You deadhead to encourage more flowering. The ideal scenario would be you've deadheaded not a jot, and the flower is just in peak flower, a bit like there's a pink pop socks down here that is slightly going over, but it's just a full of buds. I haven't chopped one off. Looks amazing. But yeah, back to your question. Yeah, of course I'm gonna deadhead, because I want to give every one of these a chance to go. You feel a bit like a football manager. You're in the cup final, and you want to give every player a chance.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's amazing, and it's really opened my eyes to the amount of work that you've put into this to get those plants, those selected few that are going to go to Chelsea and be on that platform and stage for the whole world to see, which is, you know, something really special, as you say. But I had no idea you were growing this amount. What will happen to the ones that don't get to play on the day?
Well, because I'm not a nursery, what happened at Hampton Court was that we put a lot out, so that they formed part of the national collections, but they had to survive essentially on neglect. If I left them in the polytunnel, I would come back to crispy cosmos is the reality, because there's not much you can do.
Because you're going to be at Chelsea for over a week in total.
So, you know, my wife's taking a week off work. I'm taking a week off, so kind of the day job, even though this is almost turning into a full-time job. They have to thrive on neglect. So some of them will be planted out, because that's part of having the national collection, and they'll go in, some of the planters out here, some will go in the ground, and the bees can enjoy them.
Do you open at all in the summer for, you know, like the National Garden Scheme, or for people to come and look at the collection, or is it purely private?
We haven't done, but part of having a national collection is that's the objective. What I've done is trying to take aspects of the national collection to flower shows, because you actually reach more people that way. And you know, unfortunately this October we had a bit of flooding, which has meant that the plot's perhaps not in its best condition that it's been in for visits, what with rabbits holes collapsing when the water went down them and all the rest of them. But that would be the objective, is then to get people in to come and see a national collection where it is in situ.
And we ought to just mention, as well as Cosmos, you've got other national collections.
Yeah, I've got hollyhocks as well. I say that took a bit of a pounding when a river ran through it, literally. But we'll get that back up to speed. I say most of the effort, which hopefully you can see here in the polytunnel, has been put on the attempt for Chelsea, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think it's amazing. All the very best for Chelsea. I'm going to be there anyway, and I'm going to come and find you on the Tuesday and have a chat with you, and we can do a quick update and let everybody know how you've gone. But I think everybody's wishing you all the very best. Jonathan, thank you for just giving me some insight as to what you do. It is really, it is amazing, and you've obviously worked very, very hard, and you've got the backing of Julie there. So all the best on the day.
Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you down in London.
So we're recording this before Chelsea, and you'll be going to Chelsea very shortly. Both of you are going down, are you?
Yes.
Yes, we shall be hot-footing the day that this is released. So on the Sunday afternoon, we'll be down at Chelsea, and then I judge as part of the judging panels on Monday the 20th of May. And all the exhibitors, including Jonathan, will find out what their award is on Tuesday the 21st in the morning. So yes, we'll see Jonathan there and see his stand and these wonderful cosmos that were in that very hot tunnel when I visited a week or two ago.
How hot?
Because I know one of the categories that you judge on is Endeavour, and from listening to Jonathan, I think he deserves an extra big gold for Endeavour, doesn't he?
He does deserve a big gold for Endeavour. Yes, there's a lot of work gone in there, and it was boiling. It was 34
degrees, which is
92 degrees Fahrenheit,
that's hot.
Which is hot, and that was the problem. Since then, we've had it very cold, so he's had these fluctuating temperatures. So it's 2 weeks ago at least since I went to see him. So it would be interesting to see what they're like. But he'd got thousands of plants to choose from, so I'm sure some of them will make it in perfect condition down to London.
Fantastic. Yeah. Oh, well, good luck to him, and definitely no conflict of interest there. Let's just point that out, I'm guessing.
No conflict of interest at all. I'm not judging Jonathan, so he's not on the panel that I'm judging. No. So it'll be up to the judges, and wish him all the very best.
Absolutely,
he's put a lot of work into it.
One of the things, just talking of the heat and things, he was talking about propagation and using his living room. Now I was thinking, you hear about these people who have hobbies like motorcycle maintenance or something with like an engine sitting on the coffee table and oil dripping everywhere. At least it's not that, I guess. Just soil everywhere instead, right?
No.
Exactly, yes. So
that's a lot of seed trays there, wasn't it? Did he say he planted 4,000 seeds?
4,000 seeds, yes.
So the seeds are relatively small in their seed trays, but then when he's potting them on.
That's right, and 300 different cultivars as well. So he's, to choose from. And like he said, only a very small amount will actually make the final cut and be taken down there. So he's got, 2 polytunnels still will basically be full.
Might nip over and grab some Cosmos then if he's got some...
That's right, exactly, when he's not there. I think it's already been featured on television. I think Gardener's World have been filming, so I think that's already gone out. And of course, Jonathan will be there on the day of the royal visit, which is Monday afternoon. And I think he's got it on good authority that the Queen quite likes Cosmos.
Oh.
So he's...
Queen Camilla. Sorry, yes.
The Queen.
I thought you were going back in time.
No, Queen Camilla. So I think, there is a possibility they may even see him as they're walking through. So he's very excited about it. In fact, hot off the press,
here we go.
I can announce this. The King has now officially announced, this is His Majesty King Charles has announced he will be the new patron of the Royal Horticultural Society. The patron was his mother, of course, the late Queen. So yes, the King is now taking on that role. And that's just been announced.
Oh, excellent. But you won't get into the royal visit, will you? You have to get thrown off, don't you? Off the showground.
We do nowadays. I might see if I can wangle something.
You used to be there, didn't you? You used to be there for it.
Used to be there. I was there last year, yes, but
last time I was filming, I remember being kicked out when it was the royal visit time.
Yeah,
it's like, right, come on,
because we filmed at Chelsea and. We filmed at Chelsea in the past, didn't we? Yes, that's right.
Exactly. They send all the security guards around, don't they? At sort of what time? About 3 o'clock.
Almost different colour passes, don't they? You have to have a special one. Right. I remember because I did a lot of running around outside the gates and passing tapes back in when we used to use tapes through the fence to people who had the right pass. And honestly, lots of fun and games.
There you go.
And one of the things I was thinking about when Jonathan was talking about this was the fact that he obviously classes himself as an amateur, and whether that it's important to say that because just because he's not getting paid for this, he still puts a lot of time and effort into it, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he does do other work, which is non-horticultural, but this takes over a big chunk of his life at this time of the year. I mean, maintaining the National Collection takes a lot of time. Doing an exhibit and all the preparation takes a lot of time. And he's also got the Hollyhock National Collection. So it's, pretty much taken over Jonathan and his wife Julie's lives. So, he is he says he's an amateur, but in a way he's not, because he's doing this as his job. Yeah. So he is very professional with what he does, and he's very knowledgeable as well.
Should call himself a volunteer rather than an amateur.
Yes. Yeah.
So, well, he's a specialist grower, and that's that is his speciality in the Cosmos and the Hollyhocks, and he certainly knows his stuff.
Anyway, I'm conscious that you've got some work we need to be doing in the garden, and we're running kind of low on time. So should we crack on with that? Well, we've chatted for a lot of the time. What should we be up to?
We have just very quickly. Perfect time now to be sowing your winter brassicas. So if you haven't done them, there's still time. I'm going to do it any time now. I'm going to be sowing my cabbages. That's my winter cabbages, my Savoys, my kale, all the ones that we want to harvest over the winter. Sow them now, either outside or in little trays. Plant them out in a month's time, and they'll grow over the summer, and we can harvest them through the winter months. I'm also going to be putting out some tender plants. I'm going to risk it. It's sort of third week coming up in May. So tender plants, I'm not going to plant them straight away. I'm going to just let them acclimatise, but within the next week they will be planted out, unless of course we've got a frost forecast. Same with the runner beans. The seeds that we sowed a few weeks ago have made lovely strong plants, so they can go out into the garden as well. And it's also the time, if you've got an apple tree and you get codling moths on it, the little grubs that eat in the apples. If you want to put a codling moth trap up there, a pheromone trap, this is traditionally the time of the year when you would put them on, when the little apples are just forming on the tree. So that keeps them nice and clean and healthy.
We need to do that then.
Well, it's on my list to do.
Do you know where
Fish.
the traps are from last year?
I leave that to you. You're the organising department.
Okay.
We need to get a new refill though, so
yes,
we need to go and get one.
Yeah, that's what I was
there's
thinking.
always lots to do at this time of the year.
Absolutely.
Good.
Remember, if you've got a question for the team, drop us an email, info@potsandtrowels.com, or drop a comment on one of our videos and we'll try and get to it. And if you've got a chance to do as a podcast review, we really appreciate that as well. And one more thing I was going to say, back in the autumn, back in the fall, as they say in America, I said I got some raised bed kits. Well, I finally managed to build them. So you'll be, far too late to plant anything. But now I know I might be able to plant something because winter veg, maybe I should give it a go.
Put your winter brassicas
It's
in.
not too late for lots, Sean. You can still get indoor French beans or the salads. Sky's the limit. May is perfect for planting out. So you are not too late. You're spot on with it. So no excuses. Get on with
do
it.
that.
There
Brilliant.
you go. Okay. Yes. And of course, we'll be back next week. We're going to have some bit of feedback and a few highlights of the Chelsea Flower Show. We'll find out how Jonathan's done and Barry Proctor that we spoke to a few weeks ago.
Yes,
so
that's
I'll be
exciting.
catching up with those and we'll let you all know about that on the next podcast. So we'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Watch the videos on YouTube or Facebook, follow us on Instagram, Twitter or X, and subscribe to the podcast and never miss a thing. For more information, go to potsandtrowels.com.